Thank you.
Everyone, welcome. As you log in and get comfortable, get your cup of coffee, we wanted to get right to the heart of the matter here. Happening now, the Rittenhouse verdict is in. Not guilty on all charges. Not guilty. Not guilty.
Good.
I feared I was going to mess up and say guilty on all charges.
You did it right.
I did it right. Okay, good. Yeah, that's right. All eyes are on Kenosha, Wisconsin right now. And if you watch the verdict happen live, we saw an emotionally shaken Rittenhouse respond when the verdict was delivered. And then, of course, social media happens and the news happens, commentators happen. So we wanted to come live, as we do here, as it was happening, and do our best to cut through the noise and get to the heart of this issue. To do that, I'm joined by Zack Smith. He's a legal fellow here in the Meese Center at the Heritage Foundation. And when I asked him to do this today, he said, I don't know, I think I need a haircut. I kind of look like, what did you say? What was it?
Like a crazy Sideshow Bob.
A great Simpsons reference, a crazy Sideshow Bob, but not the craziness. You are not crazy.
Well, I appreciate
that.
You
are very sane.
I don't know if everybody agrees with you, but I appreciate that.
Okay, well, that's fine. That's okay. Well, anyway, so thanks so much for being here today.
Of course.
Folks, we wanted to, as we do on these things, very informal. If you've got a question, we will take it. So please feel free to put that in there. We are ready to do that. We want to be a resource to you as you continue to sort through this stuff, all these crazy issues that are happening on a daily basis. We hope this is a good way for you to engage, interact, and all that stuff. So please drop your questions and don't be shy there. And also, I wanted to plug, too, the Daily Signal. It's our news website here at the Heritage Foundation. We've got crack reporters on the ground in Kenosha covering this. They've got great video footage. They've got great interviews, great stories of what's happening there. And there's going to be a lot happening even still here. So please log on to the Daily Signal. And Phil will put that in the chat as well. So anyway, so I wanted to pivot here now to get right into this. Again, like we said, there's just a lot of different things happening here. A lot of things lead to a case like this of this size.
Right.
You know, so much of the circumstances leading up were tough, emotional. So just curious, as a man of the law, as you are, as a great lawyer, and someone who tracks this up, what was your initial reaction here today?
Well, I think based on what we saw presented at trial, this not guilty verdict certainly seemed to be the appropriate outcome in this case. Okay. I spent several years as an assistant U.S. attorney down in Florida as a federal prosecutor, and so it's very interesting to kind of watch this case play out, watch the facts as they developed, watch the tactics that the prosecutors in this case were using. And sometimes how things come across on TV or to us who are watching on TV and kind of have a knowledge of what's happening outside the presence of the jury, you always wonder how that's playing with the jury themselves. But I think, in this case, the jury reached the correct decision. Prosecutors did not prove their charges beyond a reasonable doubt, and Kyle Rittenhouse was acquitted. Just go through it.
So there were 5 charges.
Right.
Okay, go through those, and we can talk about the severity of them.
Right.
But yeah, just go through those for us if you know them.
Yeah, sure. So there were, instead of going through each 5 individually, I think it makes sense to think about them kind of on a continuum. They're obviously very serious charges. Murder, several counts of murder.
It's huge.
Potentially years or life imprisonment even. Yeah. Reckless endangerment, another very serious charge. And then there were a couple of minor charges. There was a minor in possession of a firearm charge, whether or not Kyle Rittenhouse could in fact legally possess that AR-15. And then there was also a curfew violation charge.
But small,
kind of small potatoes. But what I think is interesting about that, Tim, is I think how the prosecutors, the attention to detail they use with those small charges are really indicative of how they approach the whole case. And unfortunately, they handled those small charges in a very sloppy manner. In fact, the curfew charge was dismissed by the judge because the prosecutors had not submitted evidence to support it.
I think it's funny, just as building off of that, one of the interesting things in following this case was not just trying to keep up with all that was going on in the courtroom, but trying to keep up with how the prosecution was being corrected.
Right.
And all the areas there. So I wanted to ask you about the prosecution in general. You do a lot of work on this. And again, folks, please drop your questions in if you have them. You help guide this, so feel free to do that. But just building on that, what were Initially, what, in your perspective, were some of the troubling spots that you saw as a prosecutor?
Right. Well, I think there were really a couple. There are like three really confusing moments that I didn't understand what the prosecution was doing or why they were doing it. Right. One is, we saw the judge get very upset with Thomas Binger at a couple of points in the trial. One of
Thomas
the prosecutors.
Binger is the prosecutor. Okay.
Right.
Yep.
And appropriately so, because at one point he was commenting on Kyle Rittenhouse's decision to remain silent before he testified. Tim, that's black letter law. It's something you learn on one of your first days as a new prosecutor. You don't comment on a defendant's choice to remain silent. And so to see someone who is an experienced prosecutor who should have known better do that really was very surprising. And I think the judge appropriately got very upset with him for that. One of the other surprising instances that happened, the judge had excluded some evidence from coming into the case. Thomas Binger went ahead and started questioning Kyle Rittenhouse about that. Again, you saw the judge get very upset by that.
I was going to say, that just seems pretty basic as a prosecutor to not
100%.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. If you think some evidence has come in that would cause the judge to revisit his ruling, the appropriate thing to do is ask for a sidebar, ask for a recess, and discuss that with the judge out of the presence of the jury, not just immediately go into it. And so, the judge was getting a lot of grief on social media for how upset he got with Thomas Binger for doing that. But I think anyone who's tried a case knows that that is the reaction, or worse, that you would really suspect to happen if you did that. And then the third thing that I thought was surprising, there were some tech issues involved with the case about certain video, whether it was sent from an iPhone or an Android, the compression rates, when the prosecution turned that over. All of that is stuff that should have been worked out in advance. And in fact, the prosecutors have a constitutional obligation to turn certain evidence over to defense attorneys in a timely manner. And so to see those types of issues being raised, as a prosecutor, that would make me very nervous.
And folks, keep that in the back of your mind as we continue to go through this today. The role of a prosecutor. There's so much power in the role of a prosecutor. I mean, they 100%. Are the ones that they really do have people's future in their hands. They are the ones that bring the charges. They are the ones that put people in a place of, am I guilty or am I not guilty? And when you don't follow that, that's a problem.
Right. Well, and look, I think this ties in nicely to a larger conversation that's happening right now. But I think what's important to keep in mind, Tim, is that if a prosecutor does a bad job or they do something that may be ethically questionable, the solution isn't to, recast the system out of whole cloth, start over, burn it down. The appropriate thing to do is to hold those individual prosecutors accountable for their actions. And so I think that's something I'd really encourage folks to keep in mind as we kind of analyze what happened in this trial going forward, is that if prosecutors act unethically potentially or make bad decisions, it's important to hold those prosecutors accountable, not necessarily to recast the system.
When you talk about accountability here, we got a lot of great questions coming in here, folks. Thank you so much. Jonathan is watching from San Diego, California. Beautiful there. I'll be there in 2 weeks.
Great.
We'll get coffee, Jonathan.
I'm jealous.
Make sure to send me an email. We'll grab some coffee. He says, what would happen to the prosecutor for lying?
Well, certainly if you lied in court, if you lied to a judge, that's a very serious matter. You would certainly, I would suspect, have potential bar issues.
People can file a complaint against you.
They can file a complaint. The judge, him or herself, could potentially refer you to the bar. But we talked about those evidentiary issues earlier, the obligation to turn certain evidence over. Those are constitutional obligations. They're two cases called Brady and Giglio. Any prosecutor in the country knows those. If the prosecutors in this case or any case are found to have violated their obligations under those cases, I would certainly suspect there would be bar issues for them as well.
Interesting, yeah, and we're not saying that there was blatant lying going on here, but it's just an interesting charge because if people are asking that question, there clearly has been some questioning of the prosecutor's role here. So, So Cheryl is on Facebook. She says, "How have we become a country where cases are being tried by the media?" I mean, that's a very interesting. I mean, this thing was wall-to-wall coverage. There's very very hard to avoid that.
No, that's exactly right. But I will say the encouraging thing here, those jurors, when they went into the jury box, they weren't immune from what was happening outside. I'm sure they were aware that the National Guard was moving in, even though they're not supposed to watch the specific details of the case being covered in the media. I'm sure they were aware to some extent. But look, at the end of the day, I think the right outcome was ultimately reached in this case based on the evidence that was presented. And so, as unfortunate these charges were brought, I think, some real questions need to be asked about why these charges were brought. But at the end of the day, our system of justice worked like it should, and Kyle Rittenhouse was acquitted because the prosecutors didn't prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt.
And building on that, the case has been settled. However, the question is here. We have a YouTube viewer that asked, does Kyle have actionable cases against the media? Do they have, we saw this in, in the Sandman case, all that stuff. And so what about this? I think a lot of people are asking that. Is there actionable stuff for Kyle?
No, that's a great question. In fact, Nicholas Sandman recently wrote an op-ed in the Daily Mail talking about the similarities between his case and Kyle Rittenhouse's case. But look, unfortunately, any action against the prosecutor is unlikely to succeed. They enjoy very broad immunity, broad discretion for their charging decisions, unless it was motivated by some blatantly inappropriate purpose. In terms of defamation actions, we'll have to wait and see. Defamation is very difficult to pursue no matter what. We'll get into questions whether or not Kyle Rittenhouse was a public figure. That changes the legal standard that would apply. I'm sure many people who commented on this case will try to say that they were stating their opinions, which are protected by the First Amendment, not mistaken facts. And Nicholas Sandman made this point in his op-ed. Defamation cases are tough, they're long, they're expensive to litigate, but it'll certainly be interesting to see what happens coming out of this case.
Yeah, thank you for that. We got Ron. He's on YouTube. He's watching from Louisiana. Hey, Ron, how's it going, man? Good to have you here. Melody's watching from Hawaii.
That's fantastic.
Hawaii. Do they serve spam in Hawaii? Is that something that they do?
I understand it's very popular.
Drop it in the chat. Yeah. Do people actually eat spam in Hawaii? I've never been. Mary Jo's watching from Tennessee. That's great. And Carol's watching from Kansas. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, here's something that I've been curious about. We have the verdict. And now we have, as we said, the Daily Signal's there covering it. Right now we have reporters on the ground. There's a lot of people outside of that courthouse. And, people are talking about, there's going to be a lot of protesting tonight and things like that. Let's just say this. Is there a chance that there is, if there are some unsavory protests tonight, and, we see rioting or we see things like that, I'm curious, is this a prosecutor in this area that would hold those people accountable, or has there been a history here of saying, well, they would go easy on them for protesting?
Well, let me be clear, Tim. I think we all agree peaceful protest, everyone's in favor of that. It's a core First Amendment value. It's something we as Americans cherish. So peaceful protest, by all means. We can disagree. We can protest. Everybody's in favor of that. Unfortunately, what we've seen over parts of the last year, we saw in Kenosha, the events that led to this very trial, those were not peaceful protests. That was rioting. That was looting. And if something like that happened again, which I hope it doesn't, but if it were, I would hope that the prosecutor would hold individuals accountable for their actions. If they break the law, prosecute them. But again, we can only, I don't know what this prosecutor will do in the future, but we can only go by what we have seen in the past. And some charges were brought out of the riots and looting last year, but some were not. In fact, one of the witnesses in this case was brandishing a handgun without a valid permit. To my knowledge, that person was not charged, and I think there are very real questions of why he wasn't charged if Kyle Rittenhouse was charged. So it certainly will be very interesting to watch.
Well, tell me just a little bit more about this as we talk about prosecutors. You and our colleague Cully have this term. We call them rogue prosecutors. And these are people who have it's been shown they're being funded by George Soros and groups that are affiliated with George Soros' name and his money, where they will usurp law and order prosecutors, people who uphold, say, hey, if you break the law, we're going to hold you accountable to that.
Right.
And they say, well, hey, we're not going to prosecute. $500 or under. We're not going to prosecute you. And then you have these videos of people filling up grocery bags,
right,
with $498 worth of goods, so they're not prosecuting.
Right.
Talk a little bit more about the rogue prosecutor and that relating to this.
Yeah, it's a very problematic trend we're seeing around the country. You're absolutely right. It's being pushed predominantly by and funded by George Soros, a couple of other liberal tech billionaires. Carrie Tuna, Brian Moskowitz are their names.
Yep.
Carrie
Tuna, she's Facebook. Is that Facebook?
Brian Moskowitz made his money in Facebook.
Facebook, that's right.
Carrie Tuna's his wife.
That's right. Okay.
But yeah, you're absolutely right.
Okay.
But look, you're right. What we've seen are these rogue prosecutors coming in, taking over the role of the legislature, usurping their authority, and saying, if there are laws that we simply disagree with, we're just not going to prosecute them anymore. Yeah. And to show you how crazy this is, Tim, in some places, like Boston, for instance, where Rachel Rollins is the rogue prosecutor there, she went so far as to issue a list of 15 crimes she wouldn't prosecute you for, if committed in the city of Boston. And under her list, you could break into somebody's home, be in possession of cocaine, and then resist arrest when the police arrived, and she wouldn't prosecute you as long as you said you were simply doing all of that to get out of the cold or to find shelter. It's absurd. Wow. It leads to lawlessness, and unfortunately, I think that's what we've seen over the course of last year, really a breakdown of law and order. But in some sense.
It's incredible, though, because we start to hear from people who would never send us emails, who would never communicate with us, who are on the left, who are saying our neighborhoods are being overrun right now.
Well, and I want to be clear.
And we're tired of it.
100%. And I want to be clear, Tim, the prosecutors that are being challenged by these rogue prosecutors in many jurisdictions are not right-wing conservative law and order prosecutors necessarily. Many, in fact, are Democrats. Many are left-leaning, but they understand the importance of their role. They understood that individuals must be held accountable when they break the law. And in fact, they've championed reforms like drug courts, like veterans courts, but they have not just implemented wholesale non-prosecution of entire categories of crimes, which is really absurd and dangerous in a lot of ways.
Wow. Well, let's go back to Rittenhouse here because there's a lot.
Sorry, you got me on my soapbox a little bit for that.
We want it because it lends to what we're talking about. Right. It's extremely important. And so let's talk about where we could go from here. I've had a lot of questions about, can this case be retried? Could this be a federal thing? No, it cannot. No. Yeah, so go through that procedure for us.
Yeah, so it can't be retried. These same charges cannot be retried by the state of Wisconsin. It's protected by the double jeopardy clause in the Constitution. You can't be tried twice for the same offenses. Now, the federal government and the state government, they are separate sovereigns. So theoretically, the federal government could try to bring some type of charges related to this incident. If you think back to the Rodney King case, the police officers involved in that terrible incident, they were acquitted in state court. The federal government came in, though, brought federal charges against those officers. But that situation is a little bit different. Those were police officers. They were charged with violating federal civil rights laws. And again, the factual basis, again, just based on what we saw presented at trial, certainly seems to be very weak to begin with. The fact that he is already acquitted in state court, I think it would, just my personal view is it'd be really a stretch to see the feds try to step in and bring any charges in this case.
Well, now we're on to the feds here, and President Biden said he's angry and concerned over the Rittenhouse acquittal for the Kenosha killing. What kind of a message does that send for the President of the United States to say that? I mean, it seems an awful lot like the federal government, again, coming in and, in a place where they may not, they should not be.
Well, and I think it's more fundamental than that. Having fair, independent, impartial courts is one of the core values that we cherish as Americans. We should all have confidence in our system of justice that if we are hauled before our courts, we'll face an impartial jury. And unfortunately, if I can step back and take kind of the 40,000-foot view for a second.
You may.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And you'll cut me off if I go on too
Oh,
long
you
here.
know I will. Yeah, absolutely.
But look, I think under the Biden administration, we've seen a politicization of the Department of Justice that's very troubling in a lot of ways. I think seeing Joe Biden make these statements is indicative of that. But we've seen Merrick Garland ordering the FBI to go investigate parents who raise concerns about critical race theory at their local school boards. We've seen the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department filing what I think are politicized lawsuits against states like Georgia and Texas for implementing common sense voting legislation. And so I think this continuing trend to politicize the FBI, to politicize the Department of Justice, to politicize our legal system as a whole is very troubling, and it's something we should all be concerned about and all push back very aggressively on.
Yeah, we had a question coming here that leads back to the rogue prosecutors. This is Lydia on YouTube. Hi, Lydia. Thanks for watching. What long-term impact do these rogue prosecutors have on communities where they're elected?
That's a great question, Lydia.
Man. Great job, yeah.
I think fundamentally they undermine the rule of law in their communities. But the impacts, you can see the real world impacts more immediately. In many of these cities, we've seen increasing rates of violent crimes, specifically gun crimes and homicides. You know, nationwide, homicides were up nearly 30% last year, Tim. That is an unprecedented jump in the increase in homicides in a 1 year period. But look, you know, one of the things these rogue prosecutors love to say is that things like prostitution, things like drug possession, those are quality of life crimes. They're victimless. I strongly dispute that. And if you look in San Francisco, places like CVS, places like Target, places like Walgreens, they're closing stores, they're reducing hours because they simply can't bear the cost of the theft anymore. Now, if you are someone who's middle class or upper class, probably not that big of a deal. You can drive to the next CVS, the next Walmart to get what you need. If you are a low-income single mother who relies on public transportation or walking somewhere, that's a big, big deal. And so I think the dirty secret is, you know, rogue prosecutors push many of these radical policies under the guise of helping low-income communities, under the guise of helping minority members of the community, but it is in fact those very communities who suffer the most because of these policies and bear the disproportionate brunt of increases in violent crime.
Yeah. Just as we draw a close here, I wanted to give you a chance to kind of encapsulate your piece that you did for the Daily Signal, and you've done a great job already, but just give us the takeaway from this Rittenhouse case with the prosecutor and all the missteps that were made. Give us the keep this in mind.
Well, look, this is a case that should never have been brought. And fortunately, you know, it looks like it was probably brought for political purposes rather than for the purpose of seeking justice. A prosecutor's job is to seek justice. I don't think that was the goal of the prosecutors in this case. But at the end of the day, our system of justice worked. Kyle Rittenhouse was acquitted, and that should give us all some level of comfort.
Zach, man, you did it even without a haircut. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's crazy. This guy right here, man. You responded really quickly, and you did a great job. And I just want to thank you for coming in here and doing this today.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. It was great.
And everybody here, just remember too, the Daily Signal is covering this thing almost wall to wall. They are working hard out there in Kenosha, so stay tuned there. Daily Signal, Phil's got that in the chat there if you want to click the link and go see what they're doing there. Otherwise, we will continue to respond as things happen live. We love doing it, and we will see you for the next one. Zach, again, thank you.
Thanks for having me on, Tim.
Yeah.
It's been great.
Yeah. Talk as if they're listening to us still, and we're talking about filling up trash bags with, with a lot of stuff in them. Since we're probably still on camera, I'm going to take it. They can see we have Heritage Foundation cups here.